let me know if you do see it because I don't want it to be distracting. All right, well, let's get going. It's 7 o'clock. Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is our very first Florida Native Plant Steward certification. And I'm Andrea Andersen, and I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you for spending your evening with us. This is a really exciting night because this is an all-girl class. We're launching this new program that we really hope will equip novices to native plants, introduce them to, native plants, why they're important, and also to better understand why the state of Florida is so unique. Over the next 7 weeks, we're going to be exploring different ecosystems, learning about different topics from guest speakers, and discover how each one of us can be a better steward of our natural world, especially here in Florida. But so let's take a look at the chat. I know some of us are just logging on. Clara here is from Magnolia. So a master gardener, wonderful. Karen from Lake County. Lynn, hi Lynn, I see you, front and center. Nell Calhoun, our youth ambassador and assistant secretary for the Council of Chapters. So it's really great to have, so many people from around the state. It shows, our community. So I'd like to begin by just telling you a little bit about myself. So as I was preparing for this class, I found myself reflecting on the journey that brought me here. I really started not knowing anything about native plants until someone showed me and introduced me to native plants. About 16 years ago, I was volunteering at a local nature preserve, and I basically did that just so my kids could, feed the chickens and have some outdoor time. And I met a ranger there, and we hit it off, and he would take me around on the tram and, teach me things. And one time we went to the sand scrub, and he took me in front of the sand live oak and he pulled a leaf off and he said, "Look at these adaptations. On one side, it had a waxy coating, and on the other side, it had, these really fine hairs." And he said, "This is how this plant has adapted, and so it can survive in these conditions." And in that moment, something just really clicked for me. I think it reminded me of my childhood. I had been raising my family, really busy with life. And in that moment, I just remembered my time in Tucson. So I'll show you a little picture. I'm from Tucson, Arizona. My parents had a lot of children, and so they would send us out into the yard. And at the time, that was completely undeveloped land. And I spent time picking thorns off of the saguaros and the barrel cactuses and crushing up little leaves. And it was only later in life that I realized that these were native plants. And, I didn't recognize those. I was just exploring my environment. But, later I learned the words like creosote, saguaro, ocotillo, and so on and so forth. So I had this really rich childhood that was really enlivened in that moment. But, the lesson here is it was just someone taking the time to introduce me to this idea of native plants. And then he went on to tell me about how these plants took less water, often didn't need any fertilizer, supported bees and things like that. And so it really completely changed not only how I think about landscapes and gardening, but it changed the trajectory of my life. Like a year later, I got a job at the preserve. And then later, I was made a supervisor overseeing all the environmental education. And now in my job, I'm at a different nature park and I oversee, land restoration at that park. And this came from a conversation. And so it amazes me that one ranger taking the time to talk to someone really helped me in my life. So my hope at the end of this course is that you'll be like me, where you'll never look at a Florida landscape the same way again. Instead of seeing just pine trees or flowers and shrubs, you'll start thinking about those relationships, the adaptations, and those stories basically just unfolding all around you. But anyway, so, welcome again. I'm glad that you're here. I hope you'll ask questions along the way. I'll have some question time at the end. And like I said, normally Rebecca Kaufman will be the moderator for this, but she was unavailable tonight, so my husband Nathan is helping us. Um, so before we move on, I again want to thank each of you for being part of this inaugural cohort for this program. We're joining, people are joining from all over the state, representing many chapters and communities, but we're all here because we share a common interest, and that's basically learning how to better take care of the natural environment, taking care of Florida's native plants and ecosystems. And since this is our first cohort, um, your feedback will really help to make this program stronger for future participants. Throughout the course, I'll be asking you to complete short reflection forms after each modules. And, they aren't tests. It's basically just an opportunity to capture your thoughts and help me improve the course for future participants. I do want to just briefly thank several people who helped to make this possible. First, Melissa Fernandez, the executive director of the Florida Native Plant Society. She supported this vision from the beginning, and I truly appreciate the opportunity. Also, Cherise Smithers, she is the operations manager for Florida Native Plant Society, and she coordinated all the registration, helped me get access to the website, and did a lot of the behind the scenes logistics, which really made this possible. And to Jan Allen for helping me. She's been helping me go through the course, and she's been giving me some feedback. We still have some work to do, but it's coming along. And then again, Rebecca Kaufman, who will be moderating the sessions. And then finally, to my daughter, Kate, who made our logo. And she also helped me make the slides look a little bit more coherent than they did when I started. So let's begin here. So let's learn about the Florida Native Plant Society. It is an organization that made this program possible. FNPS is a statewide nonprofit organization dedicated to the preservation, conservation, and restoration of Florida's native plants and the habitats they support. And the mission, I think the mission statement just changed, so I will update the slide, Melissa and everybody else. But this was what it was when I started this program. But I'd like to tell you what FNPS means to me personally. So over the years, I found FNPS to be just much more than just an organization. It's a community. And I remember going to my first meeting, and Jan Allen was there, and Pam, and I don't know if Pam was there, but there were several people who were so generous with their knowledge. And so I found a community. People are so generous with their knowledge, eager to answer questions, and passionate about sharing their love of Florida's native plants. And it's cool because it's really the most knowledgeable people alongside gardeners and newbies like I was at the time. So, it's just an exciting place to be, to learn from other people, and to watch other people learn as well. So, whether you've been a member of FNPS for a long time or if this is the first time here, I really hope that you'll continue learning and asking questions and building friendships in this society, for weeks after this class is over. So I'd really love to hear from you all. Everyone, I think tonight here almost is a part of the Florida Native Plant Society. So, what are a couple of words that come to mind when you think of the Florida Native Plant Society? Please type it in the chat. Go down here. So I'm seeing ecosystem, experts, sustainability, education, conservation. Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things I like about this is it shows how there's so many different ways that FNPS works to protect native plants, resilience, conservation learning, hopefully the future of Florida, volunteering. Yeah. Well, one of the things I want to take a look at some of these different areas that FNPS, works through. So Um, FNPS supports native plant conservation in different ways. The organization works in conservation by protecting important habitats and promoting responsible land management. It supports research by helping advance scientific understanding of Florida's native plants. It's also involved in policy, where they advocate for the protection of native plant habitats. Education is a major part of the mission, and I'm sure a lot of you have connected with that. There's workshops, they go on field trips, and then there's programs like the certification. And I know they are coming out with a landscape certification as well. But finally, as I mentioned before, FNPS builds community. It's connecting people who care about Florida's landscapes and want to help steward them. So to me, it's not just an organization, it's a community of people that have shared interests and really want to work together to conserve Florida's native plants. And this certification is one way that we can help grow a community of stewards throughout the state of Florida. And that brings us to an important question, or our first question, and that is, why does this program exist in the first place? So why does a program like this matter? Well, stewardship begins with understanding. We want people to understand that Florida is one of the most biologically diverse regions in North America, and our ecosystems support thousands of plants and animal species. We also want people to understand that native plants form the foundation of ecosystems. They support insects, birds, pollinators, and really the entire food web. We also want people to understand that many of Florida's ecosystems are fragile and increasingly threatened by development, habitat fragmentation, and environmental change. So, stewardship means learning how these systems work and then making decisions to help sustain them. The better that we understand Florida's ecosystems, the better prepared we are to care for them. So, in the chat again, in one word, what would you say stewardship means to you all? When you think of stewardship, what comes to mind? Connectivity, protection, sharing, forward looking, caring, caring, surveillance. That's it, yeah. Coexistence, taking care of the land. I love all these ideas, and over the next several weeks, we'll be building on those ideas. And then let's move on to, what do we hope that you'll take away from this course? Um, Really, every course, when you're in classes, they need to answer one simple question, is that what will I be able to do by the end of this class or learn? And so by the end of the 7 weeks, my hope is that we'll be able to, one, better understand Florida's ecosystems and the role that native plants play in them, recognize the connections between plants, insects, birds, and wildlife, make informed decisions. And, that's not just your voting, although that's very important. That's also just for your own landscape or your community or through your volunteer work. And finally, we'd like you to take what you've learned and put it into action through meaningful stewardship projects. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. So, but really what I'm trying to get at is that this course isn't just about gaining knowledge. It's about using that knowledge to make a positive difference. And so how does that certification actually work? Let's go through it. So as an overview, the program is actually pretty straightforward. And full disclosure, this format was based off of a pollinator partnership, that organization. They have a pollinator steward program, and it was just excellent. And so, the format was so simple, I thought this would be perfect for another kind of certification. So there are two parts to the certification. First, you'll participate in the 7 learning modules, beginning with tonight's session. And then second, you're going to apply what you've learned through 2 stewardship activities in your own community or in your own house. And when you've completed both the learning and the stewardship components, you'll earn that native plant steward certification. And so I'll explain it a little bit in a little bit more detail in these next slides. So as you know, we'll be meeting 7 weeks on Tuesdays for about 90 minutes. I do want to say that sometimes when we have speakers, it might go a little bit over. And I think you'll be grateful for that because we have really great speakers lined up. But typically it'll start with a little introduction from me, and then followed by a presentation from some really great experts on that week's topic. And then we'll finish with time for questions and discussions. All of our classes are going to be recorded, as I mentioned. So, if you miss a class, don't worry. You'll be able to go onto the course information page, and I sent out information about that. A few of you had not gotten emails. Don't worry about it. I will send that to you tonight so that you have it. But every session will be recorded and posted on that page so that you can watch it at a time that's convenient for you. And really, the goal of this program is I want to make it as flexible as possible, while still giving you the opportunity to speak with, or not speak with, but interact with our guest speakers. So that is the weekly format. And let's look a little bit closer at those two requirements for earning your certification. So the first is the 7 training modules, and then the second is stewardship. And I like this because learning is important, but applying the knowledge is, equally important. So I'll go through here. So completing the modules is basically just attending these classes or watching the training modules online. And once you do that, on the course information page, there is a link to a Google form, and it will be where you can provide feedback on the course, ask any questions, and also if you have any resources that you think are like particularly good that you could share with me, I will post those on the information page as well. So I started that, and you'll see that on the course information page. Let's see. The next is the stewardship action. So basically what happens is once I receive those 7 kind of those Google forms from you, then the stewardship actions is opened up where you'll get a form, and there's 2 components. There's the habitat action and the outreach action. And I want to really emphasize that this is super flexible to your situation. I do not expect people to go crazy with this unless you want to. For me, I did a small habitat in my yard, and then I helped a school. But anyway, so for habitat action, it could be something like planting a native garden, creating a pollinator container garden, participating in community plantings, that sort of thing. And then the outreach action, I think you could lead a walk, you could, attend an event for part of your as on behalf of your chapter, like an outreach table, or you could even create educational materials. And again, you're not being graded for this. It's more just to say, hey, I took the course, I learned some things, and I took some action. And so once you do that, those 2 activities, there's a reflection form that you'll sign and just send it. And then after you complete both of those steps, you'll receive your certificate and also permission to use that Steward logo and stamp. And I'm telling you guys, this is a hot commodity. People are excited about this program. I had to turn people away. I felt awful, and people even offered to pay. And again, I felt bad, but I do want to get this as good as possible before we open up to the public. So again, I'm grateful, but people are going to see this logo and be excited about it, I think. So let's move on. Let's see. So this is an example of the certificate you'll receive, and you'll receive that certificate. Let's see. Are there actually, I'm going to go to chat real quick and make sure I've covered this. Are there any questions that anyone has at this point? And I'll go over, I think I haven't gone over due dates, but let me do that real quick. So you have until December 31st of this year to watch all the modules and do the Google forms to just give feedback. Then once that's or you can do it earlier, but once that's done, then you'll have until December 31st of next year to do those two activities and do your reflection form for that. How detailed do the outreach write-ups need to be? Not at all. It's basically, this is on an honor system. So if you go, I do kind of want you to be intentional, just not sitting at an outreach, not that I'm saying you're going to, but you know, to share knowledge that you've gained either through this course or, other things. But no, your actual write-up is just like, hey, I attended this event and I talked about this topic. And you could talk about like maybe something you learned, like were there questions that people asked you that you didn't expect, that sort of thing. Will the actions like will the action steps we take be able to be shared with others for ideas? That's a great, Meredith. I love that question. And yes, we can do that. I'm trying to think how we could. I'll actually make a document where everybody, or Excel file or something where it's a shared doc where everybody can put down ideas if they would like to. But yes, anyone can share ideas and copy your friends if you can't think of an idea. I second that idea. Yeah, removing invasive species. Yep, for sure. That's a great idea. What is the best way to connect with students in this class and ID? I'm going to answer that in a little bit, but we will be having a private Facebook page for everyone who participates in this. And I could get that started sooner than later. Let's see. Or someone said Slack, which is a good idea too. All right, let's move on because I think so. These photos show some Florida Native Plant Society members putting stewardship into action. Across the state, FNPS members contribute in so many different ways. And that's something I love, is because we all have different talents and interests, and we can bring that to what we love of the native plants. Some people really like restoring habitats and removing invasive species. Some people are really into gardening and creating native landscapes. I'm an educator, so I love teaching. I do it as my profession, but I also volunteer because it's just so fun teaching. Because I always think I was that person that someone took the time to talk to about native plants. So that's near and dear to me. Other people do research. Others advocate for conservation, like Lynn, one of my heroes. She is on the policy committee with FNPS and sends out those alerts of, hey, you can help us in this way by contacting, people, your elected officials. And then others are like botanists and they help discover Florida's native plants. So stewardship doesn't look exactly the same for each of us, or for everyone as a whole. It can be a large community project, but it can also begin just by one person taking meaningful action in their own yard, chapter, school, park, or neighborhood, and make it their own. Like I've seen some people who it's not even volunteering necessarily, but they'll start a little business making stickers, and they're beautiful artists and they depict different moths and butterflies. it just depends on what, you're interested in. So, and you can take it whatever way you like. But as we move through this course, I hope that these examples will help you to begin thinking about the kind of stewardship activity that would be meaningful to you. All right. I do want to say thank you for participating in this program. You're the first group. And this is where I was talking about we will have a Facebook page. And on that Facebook page, you'll also have early access to educational resources. One of my goals is to create resources so that if you're, doing education, you can use them. But also as program participants create things, we can put those all in a file and give everyone access so that we can share those. All right, throughout the course, we'll be using this course information page as the central place for everything you'll need. This is where you're going to be finding recordings of each class, the learning reflection forms, course updates, additional resources, and information about completing the certification. We have a little facts section and everything. So each of you should have received the login information page. I know a couple of you are new. We're kind of late. I don't know what happened, but I'll get you that login information. But if you have any problem accessing it, please let me or Charisse know, and we'll make sure that you can get in. Let's see. I encourage you, to bookmark this page. It'll make it easier to find as you're going through the program. And so now you know where the course information, all the materials are, and let's look at what we're going to be exploring over the next 7 weeks. I'm really excited about this lineup of speakers. So next week, we're going to have Dr. Pamela Soltis speaking. Our topic for the week will be what makes a plant native. The following week, Dr. Tom Hochter will be talking at Florida's Native Communities. It's so funny because we are Facebook friends and I've never met him in person, but I kind of know him through Facebook. And so I'm like, you don't know me, but you kind of do because we're Facebook friends. But he agreed to speak with us. Dr. Jarrett Daniels, he was the first person I contacted. And when he said he would do it, I nearly fell out of my chair. I was so thrilled. He is like one of my heroes. And you guys will notice throughout the course, I kind of geek out on certain people that I just like Lynn Arts. I geek out about you because I just love you so much. I think you're incredible. Dr. Jarrett Daniels, he's another one of those people, but he'll be talking about pollinators and plant relationships. The following week, we have Dr. Craig Hegel. He's incredible too. I actually went on a swamp hike with him once, but he'll be talking about the home landscape and native plants. On August 25th, we're going to be talking about conservation challenges and solutions. And Joel Silcox, he's a land manager. He has a page called Joel the Arborist on Facebook. I actually work with him through the city of Clearwater, but we're not on the clock, so we're doing this off the clock. But he is such an incredible educator. He really knows how to take scientific ideas and make it very accessible to the average person. So he's really excited to be participating. And then finally, we have Benji Steward. He is out of Palm Beach County, and Rebecca recommended him. He actually has a film, so we'll be watching partially a film, but this is all about becoming a steward. And I think he's like the perfect person for this because he does so much for Florida's environment. So I hope you're as excited as I am for the upcoming weeks. So let's see. So now as we begin exploring Florida's natural heritage, I'd like to first recognize that these landscapes have been cared for by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. Here in Tampa Bay, where I live, that includes the Tocobaga and other indigenous communities. And they were associated with a group called the Safety Harbor culture. These communities lived in close relationship with land and waters around them. They fished, gathered native plants, managed natural resources, and really developed a deep understanding of Florida's ecosystem over countless generations. Archaeological sites throughout Pinellas County, including the shell mounds many of you may have visited, they really remind us of this enduring relationship that they had with the environment. So stewardship isn't a new idea. People have been caring for the Florida landscape for thousands of years. And in many ways, as modern stewards, we have the opportunity to continue caring for these landscapes in our own time. With that in mind, let's talk about what stewardship means in the context of this course. So let's start with a simple question, and that is, why does Florida have such an incredible diversity of plants and animals? So before I answer that, in the chat, if you guys would, let me if I can get the chat here. I want to see what you guys put. Um, why does Florida have such an incredible diversity of plants and animals? What do you guys think? Let's type them in the chat. Warm climate, unique biomes. It was underwater initially. It's changed over time. Different ages of land. Lots of people bringing things. I'm thinking many ecosystems. Proximity to the Caribbean. It's peninsular, wind. Import, export as population grows. So yeah, these are a lot of really great ideas. Let's see. So you guys have identified already some of the key ingredients. And honestly, there isn't just one answer. Florida's remarkable biodiversity is the result of several factors working together. Let's see. Lots of water. Yes, Sarah. Ocean and Gulf Coast, closer to the equator, latitude. So over the next few minutes, we're going to explore how Florida's geography, climate, geology, water, and evolutionary history have combined to create one of the most biologically diverse places in North America. And by understanding why Florida is so diverse, we begin to understand why it's so important to protect it. Like when I moved to Florida, I had no idea how biologically diverse it was, and it's been such a magical experience going throughout the state and seeing the different natural communities. I remember the first time I went in a natural spring. I could not believe this crisp, like this bright green grass and this water, it was fresh water. I still get excited when I think about it. Or when I went up to Apalachicola and I saw the salt marsh and the colors were just, yeah, I'm sure you guys have experienced this where it's just so cool. So, let's see. I'm moving on. Let's see. I'm trying to follow my notes here. Here we go. So we know that Florida is one of the most biologically diverse regions. And why? It's because let's get into like the whole, like not too much detail, but enough. And so let me go back. So let's look at the geography first. So Florida sits at the crossroads of two biological worlds. The tropical species from the Caribbean and Central America, they reach into South Florida, while temperate species from the southeastern United States extend down into the peninsula. And so that means Florida is one of the few places where plants and animals from both of those regions overlap. And it creates this really extraordinary mix of life. And that area is typically called an ecotone. I think I mentioned that later, but I was taught when I was learning about these things that scientists really love ecotone areas because unique things, unexpected things happen in these areas. Um, the other thing is Florida contains an incredible variety of natural communities from scrub, longleaf pine forests, wetlands, coastal dunes, mangroves, coral reefs. Each provide habitats for its own unique collection of plants and wildlife. And then add to that thousands of native plant species and millions of years of evolution. And you can see why Florida supports such an amazing diversity of life. But to really understand Florida's biodiversity, we need to understand these natural communities. So, what exactly is a natural community? Think of a natural community as a neighborhood where plants, animals, soils, water, climate, and natural processes have evolved together over thousands of years. Every natural community has its own unique combination of conditions. Even small differences in soil or elevation, the drainage of the water, or how often fire occurs can create an entirely different community with its own characteristic, different plants there and wildlife. And so together, these natural communities form a beautiful ecological mosaic all across the state of Florida. And so over the next few minutes, I want to introduce you to some of these different natural communities. So you guys, we're going to start with my favorite, one of my favorite, because it reminds me of home in the desert. What do you think it could be? What system reminds me of home in the desert? I'm sure you guys know, and that's the scrub. It is one of Florida's most distinct natural communities, the Florida scrub. At first glance, the scrub may not look especially important or impressive. It's hot, dry, covered with low shrubs, growing on deep white sand, but the appearances are deceiving. These sandy ridges are ancient. Many were once coastal dunes or shorelines that became isolated as sea levels changed over thousands of years. That long isolation allowed many plants and animals to evolve that are now found nowhere else on Earth. In fact, the scrub has one of the highest concentration of endemic species in Florida, and we'll talk about what endemic means in a little while. But like many of Florida's ecosystems, scrub also depends on fire. But unlike longleaf pine forests that burn every few years, the scrub may burn much less frequently. It just depends. Those occasional fires are essential for keeping the ecosystem healthy and allowing many of its specialized species to survive. So when you're visiting a scrub preserve or little area of scrub, you're experiencing one of the most unique ecosystems in North America. And when, the other day there was a big storm that came through Tampa Bay, and they said there was like 45,000 strikes of lightning. And I thought, so many of these habitats are adapted to fire, and that's why, we have so much lightning in the state. So, and each of these different natural communities can require different fire frequencies. So, we're going to go from one fire dependent ecosystem to another. Let's look at one that's different. And that is, anybody know what this is? Put it in the chat before I say what ecosystem or community is, or natural community is. Anybody recognize that? Well, it's kind of a hard one, I guess. Yep, you got it. Yep, that's it. It is the sandhill. So at first glance, it looks really different from the scrub. Instead of dense scrub, you find widely spaced longleaf pines rising above a diverse carpet of of grasses and wildflowers. Often you'll see turkey oak, and then turkey oak are just such a pretty tree, especially during the fall. You get different colors. But one of the defining characteristics of a healthy sandhill is that it's open. Sunlight reaches the ground, allowing those different species of grasses, wildflowers, and other herbaceous plants to flourish. But what keeps it open? Fire. So many people think of fire as something that destroys nature, but in Florida, fire is one of nature's most important tools. Sandhill ecosystems evolved with frequent low intensity fires, and these fires prevent hardwood trees and dense shrubs from taking over, allowing rich ground cover and the wildlife that depend on that ground cover to thrive. Without fire, this landscape gradually changes into something completely different. And I've seen that, and that's part of why, land management is so important, because when it's unchecked, it actually will, these other trees encroach, it changes the soil and everything. But so in Florida, fire is not just like a disturbance, it's also an essential ecological process. By the end of the course, I hope when you see a prescribed fire, you'll understand it's like one of the most valuable conservation tools that we have. All right, so sandhills are not the only ecosystem shaped by fire. Let's look at one that's found across much of Florida. Anybody have a guess? Pine flat. Someone already wrote it. Pine flatwoods. Maybe they thought it was this. Yeah, the pine flatwoods. This is one of Florida's most widespread natural communities, the pine flatwoods. At first glance, this may look similar to sandhills because they both have pine trees and both depend on fire, but the flatwoods can be quite different. They occur on broad, relatively flat landscapes, and water plays a much larger role. Depending on the seasons, the soils may be really dry or they may become really saturated after rains. There's different types of flatwoods. There's drier flatwoods, which are called xeric flatwoods. Then there's mesic, and then hydric, which is like wet flatwoods. And each support their own mix of plants and wildlife. Like sandhills, that fire is essential. It keeps the canopy open and it maintains that diversity of plants underneath, like saw palmetto, different grasses, and wildflowers. So together, the seasonal rainfall and regular fire create a habitat with just incredible diversity. In the chat, what kind of animals have you seen in a pine flatwoods? Deer. Yep. Gopher tortoise. Yep. That is looking for that. Bobcats, red-headed woodpeckers, fox squirrel. I've always wanted to see a fox squirrel, have not yet. Rabbit, wild turkey. Yep. Opossums. Yep. Possum. You know what I found are scorpions. I found scorpions behind the bark of those pine trees, and we would go out with a black light, and it was part of our night hike program, and we'd see these little, they're called Hincy scorpions. So whenever I'm in an ecosystem, I go out with my black light and see if I can find scorpions. Let's see. Yeah, ants are big ones or small. They're small. They're very like this. I don't know if you can see that, but they're pretty small, a couple inch and a half. Indigo snake. Yeah. Another of my favorite are harvester ants. I often see harvester ants in this ecosystem. So there's different wildlife there. And you can even find wading birds sometimes if there's a hard pan underneath the soil and the water is retained. So pinewood flatwoods, like I said, cover much of Florida. But healthy examples of this have become increasingly rare as development has expanded through the state. So we've looked at kind of the upland ecosystems that are shaped by fire, and now we're going to shift our attention to where water is the dominant force, and that is Florida's wetlands. Wetlands are among Florida's most productive and ecologically important natural communities. And unlike the upland ecosystems that we just looked at where the soil and fire plays a dominant role, these wetlands are predominantly defined by their hydrology. So the timing of the water, the depth, the duration, and the movement of the water. Those things are all important. Florida's wetlands include freshwater marshes, cypress domes, wet prairies, floodplain forests, bay galls, and a whole bunch of other unique communities. And while they differ in appearance, they all provide essential habitat for that extraordinary diversity of plants and animals. They also perform a lot of valuable ecological services. They filter pollutants from the water. They store floodwaters during heavy rains. They recharge our groundwater and aquifers, and provide breeding habitat for amphibians, fish, birds, reptiles, mammals, and countless invertebrates. And like all of Florida's natural communities, they depend on natural ecological processes. So protecting these systems can serve not only the species that live within them, but also provide clean water and more resilient landscapes on which we all depend. So we've explored the wetlands and the uplands. Let's move to the shoreline. This is where the land meets the sea, and take a look at this community. So most of us have spent time at the beach, but it's often easy to overlook the remarkable natural communities that exist just beyond that shoreline. Coastal uplands include beach dunes, coastal strand, and maritime hammocks, and they're some of Florida's toughest ecosystems. Plants growing here face intense sunlight, salt spray, strong winds, shifting sands, and storm surge, the occasional storm surge. And, during hurricanes, it's very intense. But these are specially adapted species that can survive in these conditions and not only survive, but they actually protect our coastlines. Their roots stabilize our dunes, reduce erosion, and provide habitat for wildlife. I don't know about you guys, but I love our nesting shorebirds here in Florida, and I'm always amazed at, how diverse the plants are. Like there's a specific place here in Tampa Bay called Fort DeSoto, and I go out there and there's so many different plants out there, but it's really important for those little shorebirds so that they can hide. And also insects and other coastal species. So often our first line of defense against storms isn't like a seawall, it's a healthy coastal vegetation. Does anyone know where this picture may have been taken? Does anybody recognize it? I have not been here, but I've people have told me it's a really nice one. Anybody? Not Huguenot Park. Nope, no idea. Well, Sandwell, good, good. I guess it's kind of nondescript. It's kind of hard, isn't it? This is Little Talbot Island State Park. And people have told me it's absolutely beautiful. I haven't visited there yet, but I'd like to. So while we're at it, what is your favorite beach or coastal park? Does anyone? Let's see, St. George Island. The coastal areas in the Northwest handle. Fort DeSoto, now I'm with you. Sanibel, Fort Anna Maria, just a second. Fort Pickens, I haven't been there. Topsail Hill, Gumbo Limbo, Cape Canaveral Beach. Yeah, so we're just so fortunate to have all these beautiful coastal systems. Okay, so we've looked at all of these natural communities, but as you know, nature doesn't just keep them in these nicely organized little boxes. In reality, all of these natural communities are connected. Dry Tortugas, that's cool. Honeymoon Island, that's a great one. But yeah, so all of these different natural systems are interacting, and I thought this was a really neat picture. Um, so, water is flowing between them, wildlife is moving between them, fire will cross the boundaries. And so, what happens in one ecosystem often affects the health of its neighbors. It's important to remember that they rarely have, sharp edges, these little natural communities. And they blend into one another. And that's what I was talking about with ecotones. It's a blending of different natural communities. And those ecotones often contain species from both of the neighboring communities, making them some of the most biologically diverse places in a landscape. And so, as we're going through this course, you'll hear me refer to Florida's natural communities, And we're using a classification system developed by the Florida Native Areas Inventory, or FNA. And when I read this, I don't know, I was just thrilled. I was like, wow, I have not explored Florida enough. And that is how many, well, let's ask the question. How many distinct natural communities do you think that FNA has like described in Florida? How many unique natural communities? And don't 40, 41, 60, keep going up. At least 100, a little bit less than 100. Hot, hot, cold. It's actually 81. And so in our course information sheet, I've included a link to that guide so that you guys can click on it and look at all the different, different natural communities. And I actually think that would be really like, how people go to every state park within a year, or I think it'd be cool to be like, hey, I want to go see, if possible, all these natural communities. But yeah, 81. So I really encourage you to explore that. And then take this photograph. I thought this was so cool. This is taken at Deer Lake State Park in the Florida Panhandle. The restoration work here was focused on restoring a wet prairie. And so I thought that was a really good picture of this blending of all these different natural communities. Okay, so we've looked at the landscapes that make up Florida. Let's look again at Florida's incredible diversity that these natural communities support. Florida is home to over 4,000 native plant species, from towering longleaf pines and ancient live oaks to tiny orchids, carnivorous pitcher plants, and delicate wildflowers. Those plants form the foundation for an extraordinary variety of wildlife, including butterflies, native bees, birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, freshwater fish, and marine life. But we're not just rich in the number of species, our state. It also supports many species found nowhere else on Earth. And that combination of exceptional biodiversity and unique species is one of the reasons Florida is recognized as part of the North American Coastal Plain Biodiversity Hotspot, one of only 36 global biodiversity hotspots. And so that's why, our stewardship is so important. It really does matter. When we protect native plants and natural communities, we're helping to conserve an extraordinary web of life. So let's look a little bit closer at what it means to be an endemic species. So we know that Florida supports, a lot of diversity, but some of that life is, I don't know, I want to say even more special, but it's unique. Some species found in Florida occur nowhere else on Earth except here, and that is called an endemic species. These species evolved in one particular place over thousands or even millions of years and have become uniquely adapted to the conditions found there. We have an unusually large number of endemic species in Florida because of our geological history. During times when sea levels were much higher than they are today, many of Florida's ancient sand ridges became isolated like islands. So over time, the plants and animals on those isolated ridges evolved into entirely new species found nowhere else on Earth. One of the best known examples is the Florida scrub jay. It's the only bird found exclusively in Florida, and it depends on healthy scrub habitat for its survival. So if that habitat disappears, the scrub jay has really nowhere else to go. And the same is true for other endemic plants, such as the rosemary and scrub lupine, which remain closely tied to those ancient scrub ecosystems. So um, let's see, has anyone ever seen a Florida scrub jay in the wild? And if so, where did you see it? Yes, Nell has seen one. Not Michelle, not yet. Yep, Oscar Shear. That's where I saw one. Archbold, Lake Kissimmee State Park. Helen, sorry, I missed that. Winter, let's see. In Seminole County under power lines, Leonia Preserve, Rookery Bay, and Oscar Share. Yeah, I've seen them at Oscar Share. Not yet. They're so cool. Well, I hope someday we all do. They're very curious, intelligent birds. And seeing one of them in their natural habitat is just really cool. Okay, so we know that Florida's natural communities support an extraordinary amount of diversity of life. But what holds all of these ecosystems together? What holds them all together? And really, the answer begins with native plants. Let's move on here. All right. So we've talked about Florida's biodiversity, but native plants are much more than just beautiful scenery. They form the foundation of Florida's ecosystems. So over thousands of years, native plants have evolved alongside insects, birds, fungi, and countless other organisms. And during that time, they developed incredibly complex relationships that connect almost every living thing in an ecosystem. For example, many insects can feed only on certain native plant species, and those insects then become food for birds, reptiles, amphibians, and countless other animals. Together, these relationships create the food webs that sustain life across Florida's landscapes. So when Florida plants disappear, those relationships begin to unravel. Even if another plant takes the place, often it can't fill the same ecological role because our native wildlife didn't evolve with that plant. Some ecologists have spent decades studying those relationships, and one of the scientists who has helped bring this research to a wider audience is Dr. Doug Tallamy. His work has shown that native plants support dramatically more insect species than most non-native ornamental plants. Um, One of the most, and this is actually one of my first Florida native plant meetings. Um, oh, and I bet someone could help me. He is the scientist that works at Archbold Biological Station, and he studies ants there. Can someone in the chat help me with his name? Is it Mark? It's not Mark. Mark Darup? Is it Mark? I think it's Mark Darup. He was doing yeah, Mark Darup, and he was doing a presentation, and this has stayed with me for 16 years or whatever. And he said, people have this idea that if they go and they raise a whole bunch of habitat, they just cut it all down, that somehow they can go back and restore it. And he said, so often there are systems in place that we don't even understand yet. And so this idea that we can restore things, he said, is kind of a joke. But I think it's also thinking about these relationships. Like we may not even have the research about these relationships between the animals and the plants yet. So I want to pivot a little bit now, and I want you guys to think about what do you think feeds most baby birds? What feeds most baby birds? Insects, caterpillars. Oh, you guys got this. I know this group is very educated here, but you're right. A lot of people will answer worms or seeds or bird seed, but yes, the answer is caterpillars. And even birds that eat seeds as adults feed their nestlings, primarily those soft-bodied insects, especially caterpillars. And there was a recent article that from Audubon that said a single pair of chickadees can collect thousands of caterpillars to successfully raise just one brood of young. Thousands. So it shows you how important that is. So when we plant native plants in our yards or, in our communities, we're not just growing flowers and trees, we're supporting caterpillars, which support birds, which help sustain entire food webs. And this is one of the central ideas that we're going to be returning to throughout the course, and that is native plants don't just grow in ecosystems, they create them in many ways. So, many insects can't simply feed on any plant that they encounter, and they need those, you know, specific plants called host plants to complete their life cycle. And an example of this that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is the monarch butterfly. Monarch caterpillars feed exclusively on milkweed, and without milkweed, monarchs can't successfully reproduce. Here in Florida, we have another example, and I've heard this pronounced different ways, but I've heard it the Atala butterfly. Um, its caterpillars feed almost exclusively on coontie, which is Florida's only native cycad. When coontie becomes rare, those butterflies, they almost disappeared from our state. But as people started planting coontie in their gardens and landscapes, the butterflies made an incredible comeback. And so that's one of, the, I guess, a great conservation success story in our state. And these relationships, they didn't happen overnight. They really, like I've said, they're the result of millions of years of evolution. Some plants develop chemical defenses to discourage insects from eating them. And while some insects have evolved ways of overcoming those defenses and specialize on special plants. That's why planting native species does so much more than just make a landscape look beautiful. It creates habitat, it supports insects, and helps rebuild the food webs that sustain birds, pollinators, and other forms of wildlife. Have any of you planted a host plant and then watched the insects arrived? Yep. Yes. Immediately. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Honestly, it brings me so much joy. It is. Yeah, someone said it's so satisfying. Yes. Oh, Craig Hegel claims to be responsible for the comeback of those butterflies by delivering caterpillars to lots of counties. That makes me interested because when I worked at Boyd Hill Nature Preserve in Pinellas County, and I had been there for years and years. Then one day there was the Atala butterflies, and I was like, oh my gosh, not counties, counties. If I said counties, that's really funny. I'm sorry if I said that. All right, let's move on. So, we are very biodiverse here in Florida, but we also are one of the fastest changing states. Our population continues to grow, and our natural communities are becoming smaller, more isolated, or disappearing altogether because of development. Invasive plants and animals create another major challenge. They can outcompete native species, alter habitats, and disrupt the ecological relationships we've been talking about tonight. We've also seen how important fire in ecosystems like scrub, sandhill, and pine flatwoods. And when those fire cycles are interrupted, those habitats begin to change, and many of the species that depend on them decline. Climate change adds another layer of complexity through rising temperatures, changing rainfall patterns, stronger storms, and sea level rise. So it can feel overwhelming, but here's the encouraging news. And that is across Florida, scientists, land managers, volunteers, homeowners, and conservation organizations are working every day to restore habitats, to control invasive species, to use prescribed fire, to protect natural lands and reintroduce native plants. And throughout this course, you're going to discover that stewardship, it doesn't mean that you have to own like a big farm with hundreds of acres. It could be literally putting a pollinator pot on your balcony or having a little small strip in your yard. Every little action does, help. So, so what does stewardship actually look like in everyday life? I mentioned some of these. Let's in the chat, what are some of the things that you may do already that are acts of stewardship? Because I think you guys, especially because you're the first cohort and many of you are in the Native Plant Society already. But what are some of the things that you do? Volunteer at the gardens, planted a pollinator garden with your family, swapped lawn for native plants, weekly invasive removal. I think I missed one. Volunteer work days, rewild property. Yeah. So I think, I'm preaching to the choir in a large part here. Wait, what does that say? Insect motels in open areas. I helped Archbold with surveying. That's cool. Added rainwater capture systems to the backyard. Teach random people about native plants. I love that, Nell. Don't use pesticides. Yes. Label native plants with common and biological names. Becky, that's a really interesting point because, you know, if you, in my experience, if you introduce a native plant to someone using their scientific name, it's so much easier for them to remember that scientific name. If you introduce it with a common name, there's so many plants that can be called that. So I actually recommend to people to name it the biological and then the other one, the more common name. Citizen science, yes. Manage a native garden on campus while also help relocate native plants from a conservation area that is being demolished. That's awesome, Joe. I love that. So, I am preaching to the choir here. There's just when thousands of people are doing these little actions, even though it looks discouraging sometimes, it does make a difference. So it matters. Ecosystems need stewards, and every native plant garden, restoration project, and education effort contributes to this. So, as we wrap up tonight, let's think about what we've thought about together. We've learned that Florida is home to an extraordinary diversity of natural communities, which are shaped by unique combinations of soil, water, fire, and climate. We've seen that native plants are the foundation of these ecosystems, supporting insects, birds, and other species with these relationships that have developed over millions of years sometimes, and also talked about some of the challenges that ecosystems face. But if there's like one idea that I'd like you to take away from tonight, and that is, and I've mentioned this before, each one of us has the ability to make a positive change. You don't have to be a scientist. I mean, it's just, it's really simple. You just need to learn about native plants. Let's see. Okay, so one final question. And we've talked about what stewardship actions, but what does stewardship mean to you? It could be one word or a sentence. Preserving natural environments for future generations, hands-on educating and outreach in the community, reinforcing my mission to support Florida's natural habitat, starting in my neighborhood, caring enough to make a change. What was that one about? Yeah, activism through word and deed. Who is that? Jan. Yeah, that's you, Jan. I believe that. Making sure these communities are available for future generations, creating habitat where it's been displaced, and fostering an understanding for why that's important. Spreading the word, plant natives, reduce lawns. Completing the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Oh, I totally 100% agree with you, Beth. So there's all these different ways that, we see stewardship in our communities. So, um, before I, talk about next week, why don't we take some time, and if anyone has any questions, as a group, we can answer it. I should say I don't claim to be an expert, I think there are people here for sure that know more than me. So, our Facebook group will be a place where people can ask questions. But is there anything from tonight's presentation that you guys have any questions? Oh, this is 8 now. Let me go down there. Any questions for tonight? I think it's like more people. Oh, yeah, the term is ecotone. So it's Ecotone. Ecotone. Thank you, Beth. Any other questions? All right, well yep, thanks, Nate. So looking ahead, all right. Well, first, thanks again for spending your evening with me. I know we have busy lives, and I'm really grateful that you've chosen to invest in your time learning about Florida's native plants and nature and the natural communities. Um, okay, so tonight's recording of this will be on the course information page. Next week, we have Dr. Pamela Soltis coming. Let's see. Please use, and I'm sorry, thank you everybody for figuring out that Zoom link, that mix up. There was another committee scheduled at the same time as this class. So if I had gone on and done it, it would have kicked them off. So I was like scrambling, but yeah, so use the same Zoom link and I will send out reminders. Let's see. Someone said, I think someone mentioned this earlier, but for the people that aren't on Facebook, could any information be emailed to the people not on it? I don't have the bandwidth to do that, but I am open to, that was asked by Nell, but I am open to any other kind of options that we could come up with. But if there's like a good resource, I definitely could add it to the information page. When do you have to have your actions completed by again? Um, it's it's actually so you're gonna watch all the videos and do the reflections. That's by this December 31st, 2026. And then the actions are a whole full year later. So there's no huge rush to do this because I know people have intricate lives and responsibilities. So you have all the way until December 31st of 2027. Thanks, everybody. This may have been in the FNA resource you mentioned, but is there a resource with a listing of native tree species commonly found in a maritime hammock? Anybody have a, that's a good question, Amy. I don't know about that. Does anyone have any answers that you could put on the, let's see. Oh yeah, someone said maybe highlight habitat specific regions of Florida. All right. For reflections, what you're going to do after this class is you'll go onto the course information page and you're going to see there's a form. Each week there's a form. And when you go on there, you'll put your name and your email, and then it'll say, which module did you watch? And it was like module 1. And then there's going to be a series of questions you go through. Do the actions need to be new or something that we do currently or ongoing? They don't have to be new, Kimmy. They can be something that you're currently doing. Books that have lists of keystone species, wait, move it, are Ecosystems of Florida. I think I may have that one on there. I'm not sure. And Xeric Landscaping with Florida native plants. Okay, I'll add those, Jan, the Xeric Landscaping. Amy said this might have been in the FNA resource you mentioned, but is there a resource with a listing of native tree species? We talked about that. Trent has something. I don't know if that's a resource. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Trent, for helping her with that. Invasive species identification names that will come later in the course. If you provide a list of emails, I can share the resources through the Google Drive. Okay, Renee, I'm going to take a screenshot. Everybody just a sec. And Melissa, if you have any books to recommend, I can add them to our bookshop. That's great. And then Jan, thank you for adding that resource. I know we're preaching to the choir, but I really do. My feelings will not be hurt. I want like legit feedback. And so, you know, please be frank in your assessment. Say what's good, what you don't like, that sort of thing. I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I'll see you guys next week for What Makes a Plant Native with Dr. Pamela Solstice. Have a great evening, everybody. Bye.